Right. Right, so someone remind me what we were talking about. The
so the case for the border control of
oh no, we're on that human rights. So when
the human rights.
right, so what happens is, so when the human rights originally the court had no power over human rights. When they had a problem with the human rights through the 1990s, so the 1990 Bill of Rights is only a workers' right. It's for immigrants and people that are not in the Commonwealth. That's who it's for. It's not for people that are in the Commonwealth. And so they imported 2.5 million immigrants so that they would have enough numbers to justify having a proper human rights ministry. Now, they've done this in Scotland, Ireland, England, and Australia. So that's why they have deliberately imported thousands upon thousands of immigrants so that they could justify setting up these ministries. That's what it was all about, planned many decades ago. Now, the courts on what's that? Is there like a radio or something?
No, it's Simon. Hang on, I'm going to put my video off. I'm going to put the sound off.
Oh, yeah, okay. Right. So the that's okay. Sorry, dear. Okay. So the now where was I? The human rights. They wanted to have a workers' rights. So most countries, like over here in Thailand, in Saudi Arabia, they have a separate human rights or a separate workers' rights that sits alongside the domestic law. And then they have the administrative court. If anything goes wrong, the workers can go to the administrative court, and the administrative court is permitted to make limited rulings on it. They're not allowed to make laws on it or constitutional decisions on it, but they're allowed to make limited, they have some limited powers of what they can do. But what the human rights want now, the United Nations is supposed to be a non-binding law, and it has no power in our countries. Even if we sign up to it, even if we say, yes, we're going to do that, we can still override that in our domestic law, and we can remove our signatures at any time. And this is the same with workers' rights. The workers' rights can be changed at any time. What the United Nations is trying to do is to get power in the Western countries, is the downfall of the West, the destruction of the West. None of the Asian countries are putting these laws into their constitutional law or their domestic law. Now, the 1990 Bill of Rights, they have wanted, so the 1990 is a workers' rights for people that can't stand under our constitutional law because they're not in the Commonwealth. And this 1688 is called, the 1688 is called the Bill of Rights, BOR, and the 1990 is called the Bill of Rights Act, which is BORA. And what they've been doing is conducting this very sneaky little activity where they just simply say BOR, or Bill of Rights, and they drop the word Act to give it the illusion that this 1990 has more power than what it actually has. And where was its downfall in power, and where is the United Nations downfall? United Nations law and 1990 law and immigrant law was not able to be taken to our Supreme Courts and higher courts. They just simply weren't able to do it because the Supreme Courts and the constitutional courts are only permitted to deal in constitutional law, which is the BOR 1688, right? Now, so when Arthur Taylor went to the court, what they said with the 1990 when they tried to entrench it is that they said the courts have no power to overrule Parliament. Now, the way that they do the system is that they have several checks. You get your Parliament right, and then the Parliament, there's supposed to be an executive that can vet and stop laws made in Parliament that are unconstitutional. But the executive has now become one almost with Parliament, and they're just working together. And the 1990, one of the checks and balances that you have is that the courts, when your Parliament goes rogue, you are able to take your 1688 BOR to the court and get a ruling against Parliament. See, Parliament, they're not doing things like stealing. They're not doing things, well, they lie, but they're not doing things like stealing or embezzlement or anything like that. But they're supposed to make all of their laws based on your individual constitutional right, not collective right, your individual right, which is supreme. And because all of the collectives want things for them that you're not entitled to. So if you have you have a handicapped group, right? And you're saying, oh, they're going to have their own school. Well, we do give them their own school, but they're going to get many extra things that you're not entitled to, but you pay for that. I've probably used the wrong one. We did do it. I've used the wrong one because this is where we did do it for handicapped people, and we did do it for children, because and we did do it for elderly. See, those three groups are peoples that are not able to care for themselves. They really aren't. And the state, we all as a collective have a duty to give a certain portion of our money to each of those groups, because they actually can't go out. But the United Nations, yeah, so we do have some responsibility, but in Thailand, it's very, very minimal what they get. It's really minimal. And part of their law is that the family have to take care of their elderly. That's in their law. So you also have a responsibility as a family. Just because you've got a handicapped kid, that doesn't mean that you should get every single thing paid for you and you've got no responsibility, and yet the people that have got kids have still got to shoulder all of that responsibility. So there's supposed to be limits on what they were able to get, and it was very small. Because the common law money is supposed to be for everyone. So they're not supposed to use it for anything that you are not entitled to yourself. So what they've added on is they've added on homosexual groups. Now, this group is not a group that is incapable of caring for themselves. They are capable of going out and getting things for themselves. You can add on a church group if you want to. You can add on a Maori group. You can add on... Now they want an islander group, that islanders want their own separate parliament and their separate schools and their own ministry and their own room down at Parliament. Now the Muslims want their own separate parliament, their own schools, their own room down at Parliament. Now the Chinese, I mean, where does it end? Where does it end? It doesn't. And what is happening is all of the common money is going to many different organisations where you're not entitled to any of the things that are in those organisations, and they want more and more and more, hey?
Or any say about where it goes.
Well, what the United Nations has done with the human rights is they've gone to these groups and they've asked these groups. Started with the New Zealand Maori, but they did it with the islands as well. They go over to the Pacific Islands, people that don't even live in New Zealand, and they say, what would you like to have included in your rights? And they're saying, oh, we want a house, we want a school in our own language. And then the United Nations is going, yes, you can have that. Yes, you can have that. But they want to have that in our country, but all of you have to pay for that. And so that is a misuse of power and misuse of common law funds, because they're signing you up to pay for things of which you have no, and you never signed up to that. You never signed. So they started it with the Indigenous rights of the New Zealand Maori, where they had a Waitangi tribunal, and they did the Te Tua Whenua. The Te Tua Whenua was a Maori land claims, which actually is none of our business. That was to do with the government and the Queen, and most of us really don't know, and that's why it was in the Maori Land Court. But they inserted into there the handicap laws and the resource consent, which they had no right to do. And then those things have inserted in them human rights. And then they have inserted in all the Maori law the Indigenous rights. And they have signed them up, and then because it's got housing, languages, all of these things that you have to pay, but you never signed up, but it was signed up to through them, you see. So that is what they're doing. So now they're on the next step. All of these laws had no constitutional power. So they needed the 1990 to get constitutional power, but the reason why it's not permitted to be entrenched was because nobody was able to go to the court and get a court ruling against Parliament or against the Waitangi Tribunal or anything like that, because none of it was anything to do with our constitutional courts. They only worked in the BOR 1688. So under the BOR, when Parliament are misappropriating funds, yeah, we've got that sound.
Yeah, we do.
Whoever's,
where it's coming from.
whatever anyone's done.
Something making noise in yours, Diane?
No, because I got nothing in here, no devices, just my phone.
It's only just come in just now. I don't know.
Someone's tapping in on our line.
Maybe they are.
Yeah. Had that before, eh?
Yeah, it's noisy. Anyway, we'll just have to push on through, but I hope we can't have any devices on or anything like that. We can't. I've got the record on here, but nobody else is permitted to record. It goes up on YouTube and you'll see it then. So I don't allow anyone to record. It's not necessary for you to record or anything like that. I don't know. So I don't know, if we can't figure it out, we'll just have to push on. All right, I've got to get this done. The courts have to have a mechanism where they can stop Parliament, and so that's when Parliament or when the public have a problem with the criminal, they go. The Parliament have got the police as their go-to people, and then the police. You give them your evidence, the police investigate, and the police will send it to the court. The court will give a ruling of the punishment, and then the police will go and enforce that ruling that they got from the court. But what do you do when Parliament does something wrong? Well, there are things that they do wrong are very different to what goes on in the criminal. Things that they do wrong come under our Constitution. All right, that's shutting down your speech, forcing you to be locked up with no conviction, many of these kinds of things. So where do you go? You don't go to the police. You go directly to the court, which I've said about this before. You go directly to the court. Court will issue a declaration, and that will order Parliament to stand down on that issue. So there's this check and balance where the court can override Parliament, and Parliament actually can't override the court, you see. So there's three checks: the legislature, the judicature, and another one. And then you've got the Governor-General on top of all that. So you've got everybody's checking everyone. He checks her, and she checks him, and they check they, and we check we, and everybody's checked. And that's how it should be. The United Nations has got no checks. They go into dark rooms with Zoom meetings and the quiet little meetings with a small group of people, and they say, what would you like to have? They're saying, I want a house and I want funding for this and I want my own school and I want extra money for my kids and I want this and I want that and I want... And the United Nations is saying yes, 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 yes. But then how are they going to give them those things? Who's going to pay for it all? United Nations isn't going to pay. They want you to pay for it, but you had no say in that. So they put it all in, then they created this 1990, and it had to go through the justified limitations, and there's hundreds of rights that they've got in there. And in section 28, our BOR is exempt. It actually says there, our BOR is nothing to do with that law. Nothing. So they're trying to get New Zealand people to use that law so that they can create the illusion that you need it and you're not using your correct set of rights that you're supposed to be using. So then they said, then they tried to entrench the 1990, and the courts have said you can't, because the courts have no power to control Parliament through it. So you need to have that check. So then they just, in 2019, they have actually create the case. So in 2010, they created the case where we originally had, if you were prosecuted for 3 years or more, you were not allowed to vote. Now, this is the same thing of the United Nations that says if you are outside of the country continuously for 3 years, you're not allowed to just whip back into the country and make your vote and then whip out, because it would create a lot of fraud, especially with foreigners living in the country and everything like that. So 3 years was the time. Well, they went to that law in 2010 and they changed it to be if you were in prison for even 1 day at the time of voting, you were not permitted to vote, even on remand. And so then that fell under the 1990s, section 12, I think, that said every person has the right to vote. That's when it fell under there. It didn't originally, so they created it. Now, they sat on that law for 7 years. And then they got a man called Arthur Taylor, and I don't know why they even used him, because he had already been sentenced to more than 3 years, so even winning the case was not going to benefit him. I really don't understand why they used him. And they added another 3 others onto there. So then they got a declaration of inconsistency. So now they have what they were looking for. They have got a remedy which we had, and a remedy that the constitutional courts can make a ruling with the declaration of inconsistency in regards to the 1990. Well, the next thing is to entrench it, as you all know. There are many people pushing for it. So now we have 2 bills of rights and 2 declarations. Well, we get a declaration that, there's that noise back again. We get a declaration that, yeah, we get a declaration that orders Parliament to stand down. But they've got a declaration that orders a declaration of inconsistency. Well, how are they going to work together? How are they? Because ours has got many things in it to protect us from the barbarous religions. You see, Islamic law under the Quran have, if you speak against them, decapitation. That's in their law. So we need a law to stop that. That's in the religious freedom. Under religious freedom, they have female mutilation. They're allowed to cut the clitoris, sorry for the language, but they are permitted to cut the clitoris from the female, and some of the young females are dying from bleeding from that. So that's why they can't have religious freedom. Some of the freedoms that they have is In America, because America has religious freedom, they are permitted to cut the foreskin of the baby's penis, cut it off, and the rabbi is permitted, well, not the rabbi, but the very high up one, is permitted to suck the blood of the penis. And this is true, and they have had hundreds of cases of babies dying from herpes on the brain because the rabbi or whoever that sucked the penis had herpes and gave it to the baby and caused brain damage. And there's an outcry in America. That's religious freedom. Now, speaking against that, under their laws, that's under the Jewish law, speaking against that under their laws requires is death, stoning, decapitation, all of these things. So our 1688 Protestant law is there to prevent all of that. Okay? And so that's why I don't know why they're barking up this tree, because it's an impossible tree to bark up. We are putting all the whole Commonwealth in danger. Well, we had 54 countries in the Commonwealth and we're down to 14. Why do you think they're dropping off like flies? They're dropping off like flies because, in my conspiracy theory, somebody up there in the Commonwealth who doesn't know their history has thought that it would be a good idea to transfer us all over to the human rights and putting us all in danger. So all the countries have been scrambling to write their own constitutions to prevent all of this, except ours. Ours hasn't written any constitutions, and so now they want all the different... I'm not sure if it was on the video where I said that they want their own governance, self-governance. I'm going to say this because I might have said it in the last one and it's not in this one, so I'll just quickly repeat. That they want to have their own schools. So if we start just with the Maori, they want to have their own school. And I don't mind the Maori because they're in it. The trouble with the Indigenous rights is that it doesn't clarify Indigenous to that country. It doesn't say that. It just says all Indigenous people. So they flooded us with 2.5 million refugees, immigrants of specific religions. So, and they all want the same as our New Zealand Maori, or whichever country that you're in, Aboriginals, wherever you are, right? So for our 200,000 Maori, this was a duty of our country, and they should have those things that they want because that was what was all agreed on. And it doesn't really cost us that much. But why is it costing us billions of dollars? Because now they have set up a Pacifica. They've got a Pacifica administration, a Pacifica room. I don't know if I've said this before because we turned off the video, but I don't know, so I'll just quickly say it again. They've got a Pacifica caucus. They've got Pacifica, presently we've got a Maori electorate, but they want to have a Pacifica election roll. They want their own election roll. They're building 50 Pacifica schools across Auckland.
Oh,
They've got 25 Pacifica schools across Auckland and they want 50 more. Our New Zealand Maori have got 3. We can afford 3. But now they're using the Muslim attack, and now they want a Muslim self-governance, their own administration, their own ministry, their own schools, their own and they want us to pay for all of that. Now you see,
I don't agree. I don't comply.
And now they're doing the Chinese. Well, then you've got the Chinese. Now they want the homosexual. They want homosexual schools for children and a homosexual ministry, and there's a homosexual room down at the Parliament. You see, it just goes on and on and on.
And
And
it never ends.
well, it doesn't. And this is called, in the 1688, ruling by division. And they're not allowed to do it because all monies that goes into the commoner fund. And you get a few things that everybody is able to get. If everybody's not able to get it, but when I'm talking about everybody, I'm talking about New Zealand-born people. Because in those, the people that are coming to our countries, this is unequal. Because they get full privilege in their own country with their languages, their schools, their everything. And then they come to our country and they want full privilege and they want their special schools and everything to bring from their home country. They're getting like 3, 4, 5 extra over what we get. So each country must be responsible for their school in their language, their parliament in their people. That's it. In their country. Each country has this. So we can't possibly do all these things for every single large group that they bring into New Zealand to set up these things. So the United...
And the thing is, no other country is doing it but the Commonwealth.
To be honest, the only ones doing it is New Zealand and Canada.
The racist one.
And Canada. So Canada has signed in the Indigenous rights into their constitutional law. And it's going to devastate the Indian population. It will devastate our New Zealand Maori will not survive this. They won't. So they tag them on. That 1990 is a workers' rights because the people that come in are not able to use the Commonwealth right. And truth be known, the Commonwealth right is very limited. It only has free speech, no cruel and unusual punishment, the right for Protestants, only Protestants to have arms, but it has our parliamentary, the means and the mechanism for us to remove Parliament when they go rogue, the means and the mechanism for us to remove judges and remove magistrates and remove even the Governor-General. That's all in there. And you don't get a right to a house and a right to social welfare benefits and a right to, you don't get a right to any of that stuff. You have to go and pay for it yourself. Otherwise, you go to the school that everybody else goes to, except for only our native Maori should have that because that is their language. Well, it's not really their language, but they are entitled to certain things in their own country. They're entitled to their little piece of the pie, separate. Yeah. Well, is it fair that someone comes from Samoa, so they've got their whole country of Samoa. Look, let's do Tonga. I'll do Tonga. Let's do Tonga. I went and researched their education system. Per capita, they've got the highest PhD per capita almost in the world. And yet they want us to build them Tongan schools in New Zealand when our New Zealand Maori can't even read and write anymore because we don't have enough funding for all of them.
That's not right.
We don't have enough funding. The New Zealand Maori are quite rightly going and complaining because they're not getting the funding. And the government makes an announcement. I'm going to give 20 million for the Indigenous schools. And the New Zealand Maori are just in their little, only 17% of the New Zealand Maori choose to go to New Zealand Maori schools. Most of them are choosing to go to mainstream English. They want their children taught in English with English, math, science. And about 17% choose to go down the other road. We had three New Zealand Maori schools, 3, right? And what happens. So when they give the funding, they look at our New Zealand Maori and they're saying, hey, you've only got 1,000 kids in your 3 schools. And then it comes under Indigenous, the Indigenous umbrella. And so the Pacificas have got 50 schools. And they're full of 500,000 Islander students, and they're far now, and their families, which is not defined, coming to those schools. And so they're getting 17 million. And our little 3 schools are only getting, one guy was just saying they only got $150,000 for their handicapped part. They wanted to have a handicapped part, and they wanted funding for that, and they got $150,000. But I don't think it is, because I've been watching how the government's giving out, and they're giving out billions. I mean, they're giving out billions, but it ain't going to New Zealand Maori. It's going into the Indigenous pot. And our Maori can't compete anymore. But then they have also got their own country at home, say Tonga or wherever you want to go, and New Zealand is also sending funding to them to pay for their schools over there.
Double whammy.
Well, I'll give you more than double whammy, because they've got, so if they're a Pacifica Maori, right, they get the mainstream. I'm really going to put this up today. They get the mainstream of the commoners, from the commoners, right? Then they're allowed to ride on the Maori ticket if they so choose. On top of that, they can ride on the Pacifica ticket as well. On top of that, they get to ride on the Indigenous ticket. And then on top of that, they can also use the rights and privileges that they get back in their own country. So, I mean, it ain't equal.
No, it's not.
It is not equal. It is
wrong in many ways.
It is excessively unequal. So I don't know where the United Nations or the Prime Minister or anyone is getting on with this idea that it's equal, but it's kind of like we can't get anybody to stand up for this. And why? Because all of these groups have been groomed by the United Nations, because the homosexual group they want to get their funding. The Chinese group want to get their funding. The Islamic group want to get their funding. The Islander group want to get their funding. Everybody wants to get their funding, all paid by us, because none of their groups generate enough money to pay for all of that. So they've decided to suck it all from the people, from the mainstream people, and stick it all in there, as they're saying, because that would be more equal, that everybody get. But you are not entitled to any of that money that's being paid there, and yet you have paid it. So that is out of the common, and I don't think that's right. I don't think you should have to pay. Nobody should have to pay for anything that they don't get some benefit from. Nobody. So, so for example, in Thailand, they have, so in Thailand, the English is not paid for by the government. If you're in a Thai school, you get 1 hour of, or 2 hours. They started doing it every day. The parents were complaining, so they did 1 hour of English almost every day in mainstream school. But if you wanted to learn completely immersed in the English language, you had to pay and go to a private school. And when you do that, because my son does that, when you do that, then you have to pay extra to keep up with the language of the country. So you've got to cross things. So you have to pay it's very expensive to learn in 2 languages bilingually. It is really expensive. And so you had to pay for all of that yourself. And many parents do, and the parents that can't don't. And they're still getting university degrees. And so, but the government, what do they do? What would be common law? In the common law, where we all put money into the pool. The government gives twice a year. They give 1,000 baht, around about 1,000. Don't quote me, but around about 1,000 baht for every single child to buy stationery. Now, everybody gets that. You can be a billionaire and you get that, and you can be the poorest person in the street. You go and buy the stuff and you give the school the receipt and they will return all of that money. Sometimes they just give you the money and tell you to go and buy it and say, bring your receipt to the schools. It just really depends what thing that you get. So that's something that all the commoners can have. And that's how common law money is supposed to be spent under the Constitution. You see, and it's just too bad, but they're saying, well, you've got more people than us, so you're getting more money, but that is not true. This is where they just only have to say that the commoners is everyone, and you cannot have anything that everybody else can't get. It's only except for that the government does have a responsibility to give something. Well, in New Zealand, you've got the freaking pensions, haven't you? So you've got pensions that everybody's entitled to. And then the handicaps were allowed to have a little bit extra. They wanted some ramps and things, so we gave them some ramps. But those ramps are for everyone to use. You can use them, I can use them, they can use them. So anyway, so this 1990, I've gone off track here a bit. But this 1990 is wanting to have free reign for the United Nations in New Zealand, and so we're on
Without
our
any contribution.
with no contribution. Well, because they've got it in their law that if a refugee dies in your country, you have to pay for their body and their family to be repatriated, to go to the funeral. So you've got to pay for their body to be sent back to their country, and you've got to pay for their family members to go and pay for their family members to come back. See, that's in their Indigenous rights.
No.
Yeah.
No. If they're here, no.
So now they've got in theirs that every person is entitled to learn in their own language and according to their own customs, and you're not permitted to force assimilate them. And they said the government or the state, which is us, the state is to provide funding. If you go and look into that, what does that mean? That means that when you have a large enough population, say of Chinese, that are in New Zealand, who say, we don't want to learn English anymore, we want to learn in Chinese, you've got to pay for their Chinese schools. And you've got to pay for their Chinese. So that comes under the Indigenous rights, you see. So what they've done is they've signed. So this is what our overall case is about. Now, the Human Rights Commission has got a law in there that the state must pay for, in order to have these workers that we never wanted to come in the first place. In order to have these workers come to New Zealand to work in New Zealand, the state must pay for all human rights law and all human rights commissions and ministries, and the state must pay for all assistance for people that are having problems to go to the court and fight for their human rights. That's all paid by you. But on top of that, what has happened with our constitutional law is that there's no money in it anymore. And the lawyers, we can't get a lawyer to take it, because if we want to take our constitutional law to court, it's not paid for. We have to pay for it by ourselves, which is what we're doing, us three.
By design.
Yeah, and so they've got, and here's the case here that we'll put up, and we'll show a clear example of this case. Now, Lord knows how they get hold of my cases, but they set up laws. Got sweating. My back's itchy because I'm sweating. They've got laws. So what was the thing that you just sent to me? Now they shove who they want to up front. Now we'll just explain to the public what this law is. So this is a great example that we can put up and tell the public about. We better get on to this case, but I just want to quickly do this video. I hope you don't mind, I'm sorry. So they made a law, this is what I'm talking about, they deliberately set up laws. They made a law that you do not need to have vaccination if you are a refugee arriving in New Zealand for the first time, if you are an Afghanistan citizen arriving, or they're bringing in 4,000 Afghanis, no, not 4,000 Afghanis, they're bringing in all the Afghans that work for the Americans. You don't need to be vaccinated. And you don't need to be vaccinated if you're coming from the Antarctica, and you don't need to be vaccinated if you are coming from Ukraine, that they're bringing in 4,000 Ukrainians. So there you've got here, now they're dividing, they used to just say immigration. Well, immigration, they say to you in immigration, we've got 3,000 islanders per year that we take, and you think, oh, 3,000 islanders per year, that's okay, we don't mind that. Then they did 1,700 refugees per year, and we said, oh, 1,700 refugees. Well, that's okay. We don't mind that. We're going to help out a few people. Well, now they're going country by country, because now they want 4,000 Ukrainians, and then they want so many thousand Afghanistans. Well, that's on top of all of those. So now you've got. Now you don't have, this is how they're doing their immigration. And then they added a new law and made it and families. So, and they didn't define how close and families could be. Well, that could be cousins, that could be, I mean, how far down the line are you going to go for it to be and families? Well, then when you look at that, you've got your islanders, 3,000, you've got your refugees, 1.7, then you've got your, somebody do the math. So I've got 3,000, 1.7, then you've got your 4,000 Ukrainians. How much is that?
6,000.
6,000. Then you've got your Afghanistanis, let's throw a ballpark figure, 2,000 in there, and so then when you add it up, you've got like 10,000 people and families. So if that includes only,
That we're all paying for.
Pardon?
We're paying, what we're commoners, what we're paying for all these.
It costs not less than $100,000 per person to bring them in. And now they want their own schools. And now we can't afford to pay teachers in our own country anymore. The teachers are leaving because they can, so you see the mess that they're creating. And now we're up to 2.5 million who all have very, very, very large families, and our Protestant people and our New Zealand Maori, none of us are going to survive this. And so here they created a law, so they said all those ones could come in, right? But they said if you were a non-New Zealand citizen, so anyone coming from the Commonwealth country can't come or go. So I don't know why. What they've done is, it's very interesting to me in this law, because you look here, they've shoved a white couple up front. So I'm going to share the whole screen here. So they've shoved this couple up front, South Africans, who came under the Commonwealth laws. They do that. They're very careful about who they shove up front. So they've shoved this couple up here, and it's very interesting to me that they made this law that Commonwealth people had to be vaccinated, but refugees and all the immigrants didn't have to be vaccinated. It was a setup. They have deliberately set this
definitely.
up. It's a setup, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so now they've come up with this couple that's from a commonwealth country, and they said, hey, we can't get into New Zealand, and we're married to New Zealanders and all of this. They have deliberately set this case up. Why did they make a law that said that refugees and Afghans and Ukrainians did not need to be vaccinated, but Commonwealth people, including people from Australia, had to be vaccinated? Why did they do that? Well, you can see it here. Now, so they deliberately, just like the Declaration, they deliberately set up that law in 2010. They knew when they set up the law what they were going to be fighting in court many years later. But this one, they've gone fast. So they've said, hang on, I just say, the couple employs
He's a New Zealander, isn't he?
yeah, hang on.
And she's a resident.
So the Forgotten of New Zealand group has engaged a lawyer, and they have submitted a letter of appeal to the Human Rights Commission and is petitioning the government to rectify the situation, which they point out constitutes discrimination. Now, the problem is here that they've deliberately set this up, the sneaky buggers. Now, the Human Rights Commission, any fight against any fight that in the courts using the human rights laws is paid by the Human Rights Commission. All the lawyers are paid, and they're charging. This is when you're hearing these lawyers spouting off their lies, like Sue Gray saying it's cost $90,000 to take this case to the court. It's $90,000 because it's going through the Human Rights Commission, and they have to go through all of that, and then the New Zealand taxpayer is paying for the case. So they boost up all of their legal fees, all right? And so this case is going to go to the court, and they're going to get a declaration of inconsistency. But what they really want to win here is a constitutional document about discrimination. Now, this is very bad for us because of the points that I've just mentioned to you about them getting all the triple whammies. So law needs to be discriminatory in each country. When law is not discriminatory in each country, it means that you need to have a different organization. Anytime that you get a number of people of one certain group in your country, they are pushing for individual ministries, individual governance, individual schools, individual everything, all paid by the commoner. And the way for them to get that is to deliberately import thousands of people in that group to get that ministry set up. But then when you go to the human rights, Indigenous rights, it says there, Indigenous people are entitled to a house and entitled to schools. Now, if you really want to look at that deeper, so say you have this Islander ministry set up, and they've decided all funding from now on will be taken out of the control of New Zealand Parliament and out of the control of the commoners, and all of that will be managed by the Pacifica ministry by themselves. So then in the Indigenous rights, it says that you can see where they're using New Zealand. As I'm talking to you, this just evolves in my head. Then in the Indigenous rights, it says everyone's entitled to a house, everyone's entitled to schooling. So that ministry that is set up in New Zealand will apply for their funding based on all the people in the Pacific because it doesn't say within your country. So then that ministry that's set up in New Zealand will get the funding for all of the Pacific region out of your power of checks and balances. And they will administer it. And they will take money that was supposed to be for people living in New Zealand and send it out to those countries. So what they're saying is those countries' governments don't have to pay for schooling. Those countries' governments don't have to be responsible because it's now in the Indigenous rights that's in New Zealand and Canadian law. And so these ministries that have been set up over there, they will send it. And what if they don't send it? Because and the only people that they hire in these administrations, you have to be of their descent to get a job. So you go and have a look at the Pacifica Health. The criteria to get a job in Pacifica Health is that you have to be Pacifica. So, but apparently that discrimination is okay. So you see this whole setup. Well, now they're going to do a Chinese one, and now they're going to do the Islamic one. Well, and then the Islamic ones are going to have their own funding for funding their wars in their countries of their choosing. So you've got a Palestinian group and you've got an Israeli group. And you've got the Israeli group's going to get their own funding and the Palestinian group's going to get their own funding. And where do you think they're going to send that money? So it's just going to fund all of their wars. And so you see, you've got to think big. So we
will just become basically a third world country, because if we're all paying for it, the taxpayers, there's going to be nothing left, nothing for our kids, nothing for our future generations. We will be a third world country. Well, this money is just going to be getting funneled out everywhere, and the pit is dry. It's dry for the New Zealand people that are of this country, born of this country, or the Commonwealth.
All your resources are going to be going to be funding that. But how it started was we wanted to do those things for our people living in our country. Our New Zealand Maori wanted to have funding for their carvings and I mean, when I go to the doctor, if I go to the doctor, I'm going to be a bit rude here, so close your ears if you don't want to hear it. But when I go to the doctor and I've got a white woman's fanny, and I quite prefer to have an Anglo woman looking at my fanny. I don't know why, that's how I feel. So the New Zealand Maori wanted to have a New Zealand Maori person to work with them for having babies and things like that. And I thought that was fair.
Fair enough.
But how they do it in Thailand is that down at the hospital, in Thailand they've got English hospitals where you can request an English doctor, but they're all private. You have to pay extra to get those, and they make a lot of money, those hospitals, and they get some funding by the government. And then the Chinese wanted to have their Chinese health, and they were permitted to have a small area in the main hospital, but still you paid extra for those things. But our New Zealand Maori should not have to pay extra.
No, because we are equal. Going back to the 1688, the Maori were adopted by Queen Victoria as her children, her subject. So we are equal under our 1688.
But not for every Tom, Dick and Harry.
Not for every Tom, Dick and Harry.
The Maori are equal to...
It's the same with the Australian Aboriginals. We wanted to do it for them, not for everybody else. And because the list keeps getting bigger. Now we've got Pacifica. Then first it started out with the handicapped. Then it went to the Maori, then it went to the Pacifica, now it's going to be going to the Chinese, now it's gone to the homosexual group, then it's going to the, what other groups are there? I mean, the group's just getting more and more, and it's unsustainable. Anybody can see that it's a disaster. But
transgender, there'll be all sorts.
well,
of
now the
groups,
now
jumping
they
on the bandwagon.
in the schools, they want the teaching to be divided with the new homosexual law that they bring out called somebody sent it to me, but they want each of the different homosexual groups to be learned about as an individual subject. So one's going to be transsexual, one's going to be this, and all the names, and the kids have to learn, starting from grade 1, they have to learn every single category. And not only do they have to learn, yes, it's in there, every single category. Wait for it, I haven't finished. Not only do they have to learn every single category, they have to learn every single category in each of the Pacific Island 8 languages.
No.
Yes. Not only that, it has to be cross-curricular to math, science, social studies. They call it integrated learning. Now, we have tried this integrated learning over here in Thailand. We tried it for decades, and it was an abysmal failure. The teachers you had to spend hours upon hours in meetings coordinating with each teacher on your subject and integrating it all. It was just a mess. They dropped it a few years ago.
But that's the reason why they're doing it. They're getting away with all this fluffy stuff, this fluffy education, because they want everything else to be dumbed down. So we become the dumb slaves that they want.
Yes.
So this is
But
why
then
they're
also
putting all this fluffy gender stuff in.
Yeah, but it's also there's been a huge exodus out of the education system with homeschooling, isn't there? They've had the highest numbers ever last year. You can see why.
Absolutely.
You know, you don't want to be sending your kids to the school with the curriculum that they're having. Sex education at 6. I mean, I'm sorry. You know, it is. They know it's damaging, and they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, the reason why they're doing this is because here's the truth of it. They need numbers. New Zealand is one of the only countries, there's very few, that has signed up to take homosexual refugees with AIDS. So very few countries are taking them because of the cost involved. It's not discriminatory, it's just that the cost involved. Now, their countries, first of all, once they go and say that they're homosexual, they have to, the death penalty they are subjected to the death penalty. If they go and say, I've got AIDS and I need medication, they automatically go under the United Nations protections because of the death penalty for their homosexuality, right? So rather than force their governments by sanctions and various other means, force their governments to change their laws, and they won't change the laws because of the Islamic law and the Jewish laws, they have decided that they should scoop all those people up and put them into our country, and our country will be responsible for those things. Now, the HIV/AIDS also their governments will not fund the HIV because they're saying, well, you did it. So what they needed to do in New Zealand once again was to create numbers. They had a limit on the amount of homosexuals with HIV that were permitted to come into New Zealand. New Zealand is a very small country. They were taking 20 a year, but they didn't have enough. They don't have enough to set up a ministry and set up the individual funding where they can send this money out to other countries in this system that I've just told you about. So what they need to do is to create a huge homosexual class of people in New Zealand so that they can get their own ministry and their own governance. That's what they're after. And so they need your children to do that. And so when they teach them all of this stuff, it's going to be just so embedded into their psyche. And especially if they have to do it in every language, they have to do it in the 8 languages, and then each, well, when they open up their ministry, which is what they're going to do, they will have a department for each section. Now, no country in the world has this, not because they're discriminatory, but because they just don't have the numbers of transsexuals, and they don't have the numbers of binary, or they have all these different names.
And
They have different names because some of them, like the man gets his penis cut off, and another man gets his penis cut off, and then apparently they're women, and then they come together to be a couple, and they are now lesbians. And they have a different name for that type.
oh, bloody hell.
Yes. So there's all different types. And then there's the woman
Confusion.
that gets a penis sewn on, her ovaries cut out, her breasts removed. They're doing this at 18 years old, I'll tell you. Breasts removed. And then another woman that does the same thing. And then they come together to be a family. They are now both male, and they are homosexuals. And they've got a special name for that group as well. So we have to learn all the names, you see. Then they have, what's the other ones that they have? Then they have the one where the man became a woman and the woman became a man, and then they got together. So there's many different names for each of these. Apparently there's like more than 30 odd names. But all of these categories are rare, and they want to increase the numbers so that they can have a special section for each one of these groups, and they need numbers, so they're in the New Zealand schools to do this. So
well, this has been going on, Kate, because my son, who's just a true blue male, he said he came home from school one day and said, I don't know, I seem to not have a label. I'm a bloke. And that's all I know. Because everyone else seems to have their either this or their that or their pan or their bi or their this or their that. He said, I don't fit in my own group anymore because everyone has a label.
Yeah, and that's what they've tried to do, haven't they, for a long time? I mean, that was psychiatry that did that. They brought out the diagnostic statistics manual, and I think it started off with about 20 things, and now they've got, well, shyness is that's a label, or you need a drug for that, and and there's now like hundreds and hundreds of them. So that's basically how they do it. They just slap a label on you. Let's dream up something. Shyness is now a problem. It's like, come on.
and
everything. They've all got labels.
And we can't afford it anymore.
No.
None of the other countries are doing this. No other countries are doing this. The United Nations only expects this in the West, because all the other countries are saying, you know what, we used to have to get our own funding. All the other countries are saying, no, you only get what is in the commoners pot, and everybody can get the same from the commoners pot. And if you've got these extra things, you go and sort it out yourselves.
And that's how it should be. It's called
I think
a budget.
So.
Yeah. Everyone works in a household budget. You've got a family, and you adopt a couple of children. You're saying, well, hey, this is the same for everybody. This is what we've got. This is what's left over. Now we can do that. You know what I mean? It's just, isn't it? Is it being accountable? I mean, I feel that it's like we're getting, our country is being raped and pillaged. Basically, that's what it
Yep.
feels like. They are raping and pillaging New Zealand, taking advantage of the New Zealand-born people that have built this country, because we are generally, we are, aren't we? We're hospitable. We embrace culture. You know,
Well, this is
we're
just,
generally quite
it's
good-natured.
taking advantage, because yes, we did say that for a few, but now when they start deliberately importing thousands of people, and their own governments are no longer responsible for their own people, and they're saying
Yeah.
that we have to be responsible, but they don't have to be responsible, well, then that's a crime in itself. And and none of the other countries are being forced to do this. None of them are being forced to change their laws to take care of their own people. They've come up with this solution, since the West is so accepting, and the West is saying each of these people have right. They're saying, let's scoop all these people up and dump them on the West. You deal with it then, if that's what you want to have. But we were quite happy to deal with it because we had only a few. And so we were able to provide a little bit of money. We were able to put a little bit of money aside and give a little bit to these people to give them a little bit of a leg up. So we were able to do that. But what the other countries were being encouraged to give their people a little leg up, and they all said no. We know where this is going, and we ain't going to pay for it. And so the United Nations said, right, we're just going to scoop them all up and then put them in these lovely abiding countries. And so suddenly our countries are finding that we've been overwhelmed, and they're not seeking a little bit of money. They're not seeking $2,000 or $3,000 a year in funding for their little few group that they have. Now they're seeking millions of dollars, entire schools, entire governments set up in our country for each of them. It's unsustainable.
And meanwhile, New Zealanders, I mean, we've got child poverty in New Zealand, homelessness, unaffordability of houses just for everyday Kiwis. I mean,
Well, New
our standard of
Zealanders.
living is going down. Yeah, New Zealanders, yes.
Yeah.
We're just dropping.
So this case that they've got here, is now I'm going to have to talk to you, because we're going to have to think about this, because now we've got this case here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's the one that we've got posted on our site. But you can see here that the Forgotten of New Zealand group has engaged a lawyer. Wonder who the lawyer here is. We think it's the Yardley, the same lawyer that did the Yardley case, that tried to put S28 onto United Nations law. He's getting paid, any lawyer that's doing human rights is getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars by us for every case that they take. And he's submitted an appeal to the human rights for constitutional discrimination. Constitutional discrimination, you see, that's what he submitted. So we, in an actual fact, we, in our case, right, can you see our case? We I don't mind putting this up for the public to see. We had decided, when we, getting back to the vaccination, we had decided when we saw that Commonwealth people had to be vaccinated and non-Commonwealth people didn't have to be vaccinated. And now that it's lucky that we didn't do this case, because we have just realised that they deliberately set up that situation so that they could go to the court and get a court ruling on a constitutional discrimination. They deliberately set it up. So we were about to go to the court using our 1688, and I'm going to be asking your opinion in a minute. So we have claimed that under S28 of the 1990 Bill of Rights Act, that anyone that comes from the Commonwealth is exempt from the 1990 Bill of Rights Act. And we are saying that under forfeiture of person, preventing them to enter New Zealand, that comes under forfeiture of person with no conviction that there's anything wrong with you, and preventing you from travelling to New Zealand, which is a Commonwealth country. We were saying that under Crown law, that S28 applies to all United Kingdom and all Crown law. That was our argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've used their case where they said that refugees, Afghanistanians, Ukrainians are permitted to come with no vaccination, and Commonwealth people are not permitted. So here we're going to be having, we're going to be asking for two declarations. So we're asking for a declaration that all Commonwealth people within New Zealand are entitled to use the 1688 Bill of Rights. That's what we're asking. But now here you see that we have another case here. Because now here you see, I don't know if you can see, can you see two of them together?
Yeah.
Now here you see they're going to have their case. They have to go through the Human Rights Commission first, and here we have our case. And so we've got to get our case in very quickly, because they're using that law to get a human rights discrimination, and they're using white people to get that. And we're using our law, because if you look how they've set that up, I'm going to close the video in a minute and we'll go back to our discussions. But if you look how they've set that up, in this case, they have deliberately set up a law where in this case, they have deliberately set up a law where refugees, Afghanistanians, Ukrainians are in favour, they're getting something, and they have deliberately set up a law where Commonwealth people are not getting something. How freaking sneaky is that?
Yeah. But we knew that, didn't we? We knew this right from the start, back when we...
Well, I didn't really realise until even just this moment, talking to you and looking at what you sent me this morning and looking at what they're going to court for their case. And I even just realised we did realise that it was discriminatory. We did realise that they were going against the Commonwealth people. But we only just realised that this will be the first time that they're going to get a discriminatory, where refugees, Afghanistanis and immigrants have got something, and Commonwealth people have been denied that same thing to get their case for the United Nations. And this is just further trying to entrench that 1990 pariah devil's law into New Zealand, isn't it? So usually
and Simon Bridges has been speaking about it quite a lot. So I think that New Zealand Forgotten, whatever the site is mainly very politically driven, and I think it is actually Simon Bridges. So he's speaking up in Parliament about it quite a lot as well, making a bit of a noise.
They had to create a case. They've got to create cases where, shall I say, white people, that I don't like to say that, but I shall say even Commonwealth people, they needed to create a case where Commonwealth people were lost and immigrants and workers gained. So they deliberately wrote a law to create They write the law first,
Yeah.
and now they've gone to create the case. And so it has got to go through, in this case, it's got to go through the human rights first, and then it will go through the 1990 at the legislative. And if it fails, they'll then go to the court to get the declaration, or they may even go directly to court to get the declaration of inconsistency. And in this case, it's an inconsistency of the refugees getting more while Commonwealth people are getting less. So they're just creating this. We can actually show in a court of law the manipulation of the law going on by the United Nations in our country. We actually can show that, can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is what we need. This is what we need to be fighting. That they're actually deliberately creating. They're actually deliberately writing discriminatory laws. This is fraud. Actually, they're deliberately writing discriminatory laws so that they can create a court case and send it through the court, aren't they?
And infiltrate. Yeah. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
That is fraud. I'm speechless. I'm speechless. I just realised it. No, I'm speechless. But that's what they're doing. And are the courts involved?
Well,
we
the proof will be in the pudding because we're ready to go, and if they've got something already to go in off the bat of this, they've obviously got lots of cases probably all ready to go, and that will prove that they're fraudulent.
When you see that they're deliberately writing laws to set up these cases that are costing hundreds of thousands of dollars for New Zealand people when our people are sleeping in the streets.
Yes,
our people are sleeping in the streets.
Yeah.
And their education has plummeted to less than 40% of the New Zealand population can't even read at a functional level.
It's
because
there's
and they're deliberately doing this. There's a crime here.
Yeah. Yep. You know, today I just was out in Albany and I went for a little bike ride around the place, and I saw this homeless, you know, like where this bed is, you know, and it's really cold. I just had a look where this person has a mattress or whatever. They must go there to sleep, and there's all these buses and stuff around the place, and it's like, this isn't North Shore. You know, why are we seeing this? And it really just brought a thing to my heart. You know, quite emotional that poor person that has got to live like that. And this is what we have got. We've got homelessness. We've got child poverty, and here we are putting all our money into, you know, immigration and helping other people when we can't even help our own New Zealand people. There's something seriously wrong about this.
They closed down all the treatment centres for addicts, so you can no longer go and get treatment anymore for your addictions. They closed all that down. But anyway, I'm going to turn off this video. Does anybody want to say, and then we'll keep talking because we're going to get this done today, but I'm going to turn this video off. And has anybody got anything to say on that they want to say?
No.
Right.
Speechless.
I'm speechless. I only just realised this talking to you now, what they're doing.
Disgusted in what they're doing.